Hello everyone, my name is Sandy Burnett and it's a great pleasure for me to give the next in the series of Art Society lectures at home. For those of you who haven't already met me, I am a musician. I make music half of the time, and for the other half of my time I talk about it, either on air, online, in print, or indeed in person at Art Society meetings up and down the land. It's been great to meet some of you on my peregrinations at meetings over the years, but today the boot is in the other foot. You come to me and I'm welcoming you into my house in West London. So music is a thing for me, but not just that. The context in which the music is produced is for me incredibly important. And with that in mind, I'm going to turn today to the figure of Ludwig van Beethoven. For my money, the most significant classical composer there's ever been, because he learnt the skills of music and then he used the musical power that he had to say new things in music that had never been done before. One of the compositions in which Beethoven did just that is his Third Symphony, composed in the summer of 1803, very much infused with the spirit of the times. But something happened to this symphony which made Beethoven explode in a fit of rage, and that's the dramatic kernel of the talk I'm going to be presenting for you today. First of all, I'm going to be outlining Beethoven's backstory. I'm going to be then talking about the Third Symphony. I'm going to be turning to the piano and playing a few themes to bring it alive for you. And then I'm going to step back and assess where the Eroica Symphony sits in the grand scheme of things. Do go off after this talk and listen to the Eroica Symphony again in its entirety. You won't have any difficulty at all in tracking down a recording. So what was Beethoven's backstory? He wasn't born in Vienna, which was the world capital of music making at that time. He was born in 1770, 250 years ago, in Bonn, where his family was a musical one. His grandfather had been Kapellmeister to the court in Bonn. His father, Johann, though, was a much less successful musician and man. He was an alcoholic. He was a violent, abusive, terrible father to Ludwig and his two younger brothers. So there's a lot of unhappiness there, which you can maybe pick up from this lovely but anonymous portrait of Beethoven when he was 12 years old, made in 1783. So although the young composer's home life was grim, out and about in Bonn things were much better. The young Beethoven had a great teacher in the figure of Gottlob Neefe, who was court organist. Beethoven stepped in as Neefe's assistant, which is why we have this lovely silhouette of Beethoven looking, I have to say, uncharacteristically smart and well scrubbed, wearing ponytail and wig and ruff and all this kind of courtly garb. Bonn's musical establishment was also a classy outfit, and that's because Maximilian Franz, the Prince Elector of Cologne, who had a seat in Bonn, was a very keen music lover. Max Franz was the youngest brother of the Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II, so Beethoven took the opportunity to have some strings pulled and to go to Vienna in November 1792 to further his musical training with a few letters of recommendation under his arm. Now the idea is that Beethoven would study with Joseph Haydn, the greatest living composer at that time, because Mozart unfortunately had died. But for some strange reason, these two composers never hit it off in the master-pupil relationship, and Beethoven made instead a lot of headway in the extracurricular environments of playing at aristocratic salons. This is a very important forum to show just how good you were as a musician. It was very important because it was by doing that that you would come into contact with wealthy patrons who would then support you during your time in Vienna. So let's quickly look at four of them now. From left to right, we have Prince Lichnowsky, who gave Beethoven an annual allowance of 600 florins for 7 years on end and gave him lodging too. Next to him, Prince Lobkowitz, who was the eventual dedicatee of the Third Symphony. Next to him, Count Razumovsky, the Russian ambassador, now only famous because Beethoven composed a set of Razumovsky quartets in his name. And finally, the Archduke Rudolf, dedicatee of 14 works by Beethoven, including the great Missa Solemnis. Now, I think that Beethoven carved out a great number with them. They really respected him, they loved his music making, and they really wanted to help him. He didn't acquiesce in becoming their servant. He retained his artistic freedom, and that was incredibly important. So back to those aristocratic salons of the 1790s, there were lots of pianists around at that time. Arthur Loesser has estimated in the mid-1790s there were 300 pianists milling around in Vienna. But Beethoven was determined to prove that he was the best, and in fact, he did indeed, in his playing and his improvising, have something that none of the other pianists had. A raw expressiveness that somehow moved his listeners to tears when he was playing. That really confused the Viennese. How on earth could he be doing that? They were used to pianists who played entertaining music, but Beethoven already at that early stage was plumbing real emotional depths. Even though the kind of pianos he was playing were much more flimsy than the ones we see today, like this one you can see in the image by Walter. Almost if you sneezed, you would knock the thing over. They were very flimsy instruments indeed, but the young Beethoven was using instruments like that to express his enormous musical power. So in the salons, Beethoven proved himself as a star pianist, and then as the century turned, he was composing string quartets and the first two of his symphonies. It's around this time, when Beethoven was in his early 30s, that this full-length portrait of Beethoven was created by Joseph Willibald Mähler. It's authentic, it's the only one of his made during his lifetime, which is full length, and it shows Beethoven really directing traffic. I'm fascinated by this right hand sticking up, gesticulating, taking control. Beethoven loved the principle of freedom, and I think he's grasping the future for himself, but that's just my reading of it. You may have different ones. With that in mind, I think you can guess why Beethoven loved what he heard about Napoleon Bonaparte so much. This dashing young Corsican military genius who'd leapt to power, was made first consul of the French Republic in 1799. And Beethoven loved this idealization, this embodiment of the ideas of freedom and justice in this young Corsican upstart. So, in the summer of 1803, after he composed his Third Symphony, he first wanted to dedicate it to Napoleon Bonaparte, and then he decided to name this symphony the Bonaparte Symphony after the French ruler. Then something catastrophic happened. That Napoleon in May 1804 had made himself Emperor of the French, and in December, the 2nd of December 1804, Napoleon organized a grandiose coronation event, which you can see depicted by portrait painter Jacques-Louis David. You see Napoleon there actually crowning Josephine, Empress, and the poor old Pius VII, Pope Pius VII at the back, not really getting much of the look in. When Beethoven heard about this incident, according to his protege Ferdinand Ries, he absolutely hit the roof. He felt betrayed and he was absolutely furious. And Ries quotes Beethoven in these words, talking about Napoleon. "Now he too will tread underfoot all the rights of man to indulge only his ambition. Now he will think himself superior to all men and become a tyrant." So that left Beethoven with a problem, because he'd written the name Bonaparte on the front page of his brand new symphony. What did he do with this frontispiece? Let's take a look. This is one of the most amazingly dramatic scratchings out in all of classical music history. What we can see in a mishmash of Italian and French and German, you have to get used to that in dedications from this era. Sinfonia Grande, Grand Symphony, 804 im August, so that's 1804, del Signor Luis van Beethoven, that's Ludwig of course. Underneath the scratching out, you can see how violent that is. The words were intitolata Bonaparte, entitled Bonaparte. In fact, if you look very carefully, just at the end, I think the TE survived the dramatic crossings out. So this is the fit of rage that I'm referring to in the title of this lecture. So out went the title, the Bonaparte Symphony, and when the symphony did eventually come to be published in 1806, in came the revised title, the Sinfonia Eroica, composed to celebrate the memory of a great man. So by this stage the work was complete. So let's take a look at the music itself now. I want to flag up a few things about it. So despite all the drama around changing the title, the work itself was complete. So this is where I'd like to turn to the piano and show you one interesting thing from each of the four movements of the Eroica Symphony. So the first movement is mighty. It starts with two terrific chords and then the main theme gets underway. If you think of the main theme of that symphony as, the first movement of that symphony, as a hero who later comes to a tragic end, then you might be interested in what are the contours of the middle of that theme as it unfolds. There's an interesting swing in the tail there, and if you're of a romantic bent, you might think that that's the fatal flaw in the hero that brings him crashing down towards the end of Act 5. In Beethoven's symphony, though, the tragedy comes in the second act, which is a marcia funebre, and it begins like this. And what Beethoven is doing here is he is evoking the sound of a French revolutionary funeral march, drawing on the kind of sounds of the French revolutionary composers at the time. In particular, two things. He gets the violins to play the theme on the lowest possible note that they can play. It's very dark, shrouded, muted sound. And below it we have this amazing rumble from, in the orchestra, the cellos and basses, and what they're doing is they're evoking the sound of massed, muted drums at the side of the funeral cortege as the hero makes his way to the grave. Not played by drums in the orchestra, but by cellos and basses. And talk of the orchestra, there is an unusual thing about the orchestration to the Eroica Symphony in that it uses not the usual two, but three horns. And they have their glorious moment in the trio, the central section of the third movement, where they start the music, they start that central section completely on their own, like this, all three of them in blazing glory. And then in the finale, it's a set of variations on a theme which is a terrific set of variations, but it's based on a theme which is essentially quite simple. Now, Beethoven had treated that theme in a ballet called the Creatures of Prometheus. So there's the spirit of Prometheus underpinning this finale of the Eroica Symphony. Prometheus, the rebellious titan of ancient Greece who stole the sacred fire from the gods and was horribly punished in return. So it's interesting, isn't it, that although Bonaparte was excised from the frontispiece of this symphony, the figure of Prometheus remains. How did the Eroica go down at the time? For some, it was a triumph. For other listeners in Vienna, this was a really difficult work that they just couldn't handle. Because let's face it, if you came to a concert just wanting to hear a nice, chirpy symphony with a few great tunes, then you'd come to the wrong gig, because in this symphony, Beethoven wanted to do something much more than that. This is the score in the current Bernreiter edition. It runs to 112 pages. Beethoven's first symphony, premiered in April 1800, runs to only 56 pages. So this symphony is much longer, it's much more profound, and the emotional range of the work is far greater. So, when all said and done, how important is the Eroica? Where does it stand in the great evolution of classical music history? This is a really important work. At the start of the 19th century, the whole aesthetic of music was changing. Out was going, the idea that music should just be light and entertaining and beautiful unto itself. In was coming the idea that music, together with painting, sculpture and poetry and drama, should help to unlock, to use their tools to unlock something about the human condition. Beethoven was showing how we can do that in music, and this is one of the ways which, this is one of the works which are showing the way forward. I really hope you found these insights useful. I love this work and I hope you do too. Do go away and listen to a complete performance all the way through. And once this dreadful lockdown is over, I'm dying to come back to Euro Societies and talk about Beethoven perhaps, or indeed anything from Baroque music through the development of jazz. So I usually come to you, but as a one-off, I'm very grateful that you've come to my house in West London. Thanks for joining me. But for now, goodbye.